She's a professor in educational studies in the College of Education and Human Ecology. She's also the director of QualLab Research Center and an editor of the Review of Higher Education, one of the leading journals in the education field. She coordinates the Qualitative Inquiry in Education QIE certificates and S-Core courses for the department. Professor Pasque is a senior scholar diplomat, awarded in 2024, and also a Diamond Honorary class of 2011 by the American College Personnel Association. So permit me, like we have such a wonderful, erudites amongst us today. So permit me to welcome Professor Pasque.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate the invitation and that everybody took the time to be here, either live or watching the video later on. Thank you so much. So I think we'll just get started, and I'm going to allow for conversation in the chat, but really, you know your research better than I do. Your topics, you are the experts. And I know there are people here potentially from the social sciences, from medical center, from arts and humanities, all over campus. We have some incredible scholars at The Ohio State University. And so as you engage with the conversation today about the research life cycles and the way culturally responsive research decisions can be made throughout the life cycle, I'd love for you to center your own research projects and think that through and how this might apply to you and your own research. So with that, I do want to say a big thank you to Taiwo. Librarians are the best on campus where I graduated from, all over throughout my career. I'm always connecting with our faculty. They are professors at the library and great administrators. Also, a thank you to and shout out to Ingrid and Brian and everyone at the Research Commons who makes this series possible. I attend many of the sessions myself, as do a number of people on the team. So today, here's just a quick little overview of what we're going to talk about. We'll do a land acknowledgement, which I think is incredibly important, especially as we talk about culturally responsive research. A little introduction of me. Some of you might know me quite well. Some of you may never have met me before. So this gives you a little sense of who I am and the work that I've done. We'll talk a little bit about the current context, and actually that'll be threaded throughout our conversation of culturally responsive research decisions at different spots in the life cycle. I'll provide some tangible examples and ask you to think about certain questions and engage in the chat in terms of what some of the examples are for you. And hopefully we'll have lots of conversation at the end for us to all engage. So I want to start by acknowledging the land and the histories of Central Ohio, which I'm in right now in Clintonville. And Central Ohio is the traditional and contemporary homeland of the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Delaware, and many indigenous nations. I think people at Ohio State probably, hopefully, know this better than when I do presentations in Canada, in the US, or wherever, China. This year are some of the places that I've presented at, and I've shared a little bit about Ohio with that group. And you all, many of you live here, so if you have not had a chance to actually engage with the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks, which are 8 sites across Central Ohio. These are actually just over a year ago received UNESCO World Heritage Site designations, like the Grand Canyon. These are amazing sites and literally ancient brilliance in terms of the stars and really identifying different times, points in time. And I want to encourage you to attend. And when you do, please go to one of the sessions where they tell you a little bit about this so you understand what you're looking at. I think our history in Ohio is quite deep. My history and who I am, I graduated from the University of Michigan. I worked at Cornell before that, a first-gen college student, toured around the universities across the country with University of Michigan, University of Oklahoma, NC State, where I was a department head of 850 graduate students, 55 or more faculty and staff, and then was encouraged to come to the Ohio State University in order to start the QualLab Research Center. So I'm excited about QualLab and the work that we've done in a short 5 years, but I draw on some of the work that I have learned from sociology professors, from psychology professors, intergroup dialogue programs, and the work I've done over time. And at Ohio State and beyond, I have worked with people in the vet school, in internal medicine here at Ohio State, TNL, Nationwide Children's Health. So I've learning as leadership's actually a company in California. So I've worked with qualitative scholars in various different parts of the university. So again, make sure that this applies to you and your work. What the QualLab is and what we offer is not free like the library. So please use your libraries. But now that we're on soft money, we do get grants and contracts and do consultations and run institutes. But we do have free a dashboard of resources with YouTube videos and links and resources on qualitative research. So please do check that out. I work with a team too, a great team there, so I want to acknowledge their labor. I was asked to talk about culturally responsive research in our conversation today and want to mention one of the quotes that I've really talked about that kind of grounds some of this work is that we, the world, is really dealing with wicked problems that are very complex and tangled. They persist even though we've been working on them for years, and we struggle against these dominant health, educational, economic, environmental, legal, socio-political contexts, right? These problems have been happening for centuries. And so what is our role as researchers in this historical present to address these issues? And for me, I think research, it's important to really foster critical change through an iterative process of research and practice. Research and practice. You want to make sure that these are engaged, that we're not sitting in on an ivory tower, but that we're working with communities and engaged, whether it's communities coming up with research questions with us, however we're doing that with your work, and to make sure that we're looking at our intentional research designs and making sure it's purposeful, rigorous, quality, trustworthy, whatever your field uses in terms of those terms. Those are the ones that I want you to focus on today, because I know it's different across fields and disciplines. And I want to draw from Shields here, who talks about most researchers, us, we enjoy a social location of power and privilege, one that requires we take a stance as researchers. Critical and culturally responsive research holds promise for promoting policies and practices that can lead to change for hopefully suitable and beyond suitable global future. So it's up to us to ask these questions and answer these questions in order to make change in the world that we seek to really understand. But how do we do this? That's the question of the day and the focus of the conversation. How do we take up culturally responsive research? Well, first, what is it? I've worked with E. Alexander, who is an alum, a Buckeye, who is now a faculty in social work at University of Kansas. Culturally responsive research includes two things: cultural competency, the ability to appreciate and celebrate cultures of origin while gaining knowledge, and fluency in cultures oneself. So it's up to us to seek out, not for people to educate us, but for us to take that action to educate ourselves, as well as socio-political consciousness, really understanding and using that knowledge to solve problems in sustainable ways. So these two come together. But yet I find, and then my colleague Leslie Gonzalez, who's at the University of Arizona, has found through her research that so many of us as graduate students were taught exactly the same way that our wonderful mentors and faculty have taught us. You're expected to be somewhat of a mini me or do it one way because they are, I would say in my case, really trying to help me to take it up so that I can be a strong scholar. But they're taught a certain way and then they teach me a certain way. And so thinking about how do we break that cycle or make sure we're considering myriad approaches and then choosing the approach that's right for us for our research study, I think is key. And so not perpetuating epistemic injustice, as has been talked about by Dr. Gonzalez and scholars, but to also be very aware that positivism is the dominant research design and approach in many fields, maybe not every field, but paying attention to power and what the dominant approaches are and what you need to do to get tenure or to get that journal in, I think is very important to pay attention to that as we think about really centering and not giving up on culturally responsive research. So how do we do this? There's a couple steps that I want to talk about today. And again, I want you to think about your own research. And so many of you are coming from so many different fields and disciplines. I'm going to kind of put a pause or hold on epistemologies, ontologies, axiologies, praxeologies, and or theories or theoretical or conceptual frameworks. I feel like there are so many of them. You can pull that in. You know, hopefully your own ways of knowing and being and doing. And we will talk a little bit about praxeology in number 7 about actually taking that toward change and trying to make a difference. So we'll pay a little bit of attention in that, but we'll talk about all these decision-making locations. So define culturally responsive research recognizes culture as central to the research process and uses the cultural standpoints of both the researcher, paying attention to who you are and your own multiple wonderful identities, and the people that you're researching or working with, right? There's that research on and that harmful research that has been done years and years. And then there's also working with and collaborating with communities. Give an example that I gave last week. I grew up at the edge of Detroit, 8 Mile and Woodward, and then I went to University of Michigan for my PhD. And the College of Education at one point was told not to come back to the schools in Detroit because the university researchers were not giving back to the schools. So we're going to stop. We're not going to have you come in anymore unless you can actually have a reciprocal relationship. And that is what has ensued since that open conversation about that. So making sure that there's this reciprocal relationship is really key. And I'm going to start with something that many of you are probably very familiar with. This 5 stages of a research project. You're really thinking about the so what. You're building on existing research that is out there and then coming up with original research questions that are answerable and that you really work to push and contribute new knowledge toward change and making that difference based on what those questions were. It could be very small, it could be very large. In qualitative research, this is iterative. We know that this is iterative. It might change over time and really is this cycle. But I want to expand on that with culturally responsive research in mind and really talk about how you engage with research, clinical practice, academic, social, local, international communities. You're engaged with communities. You bring in theories from your field and discipline. You engage in this iterative process. So I'm Sicilian and Italian, so you see my arms moving if you're looking at the little window. So that's the ABCs of me. So we're going to keep going and talk about beyond the basics, right? So here's a piece that I'm working on with Sage and working on a book about decision points for researchers and what these are. So how do we take up these culturally responsive decisions throughout our research studies? So this is not the end all be all. It is one approach that really thinks through the life cycle, and culturally responsive decision points, I think, are a part of thinking about what the problem area is with communities, engaging in conversations. What are the theoretical or conceptual frameworks you're bringing in? What are the questions you're asking? But also with your methodologies, your methods for collection, your methods for analysis should not abandon your theoretical framework or culturally responsiveness. It should still contain it and be a part of that. Also threaded through, of course, rigor. Catalytic validity is a term by Patty Lather, who was a faculty here for years as an emerita. And it's actually where the community decides the validity of your research findings. So lots of different terms there, but I think the key is that this is not didactic. It's actually iterative. There's decision points and you keep folding back on each other. And I want to move to tangible examples as inspiration for you to continue to disrupt, overturn, interrupt, reimagine culturally responsive research toward making needed change, whatever that is for your research. So I want to think with you about these and really think through examples. Excuse me. The first one that I want to offer is to overturn this didactic approach, right? To start with the community. Borderland Matisse Feminism, Cynthia Saavedra, Ellen Nymark, they created this approach, and it really is about starting with the community and engaging. And it is an epistemology, theories, methodologies all together. It's not didactic. It lives in these arrows in between. It is embodied, disrupts dualistic thinking. There are so many approaches that you can pull from that really take up approaches that might be different than how we're always taught. Another one from the Wilder Foundation is about community engagement, community informed, community involved, community directed, where your grant is paying community members to actually be engaged, active recruiters and collection and analysis, engaged members of the research team. So there are different research projects that I've worked on where that has happened, where the grant actually pays community leaders. I think we have an amazing expert here, Maurice Stevens, Dr. Stevens, who's at Ohio State, who does so much in terms of engaged research. Please take a look at your options here at Ohio State, as well as beyond our walls. Another set of tangible examples are the books that have come up out of the Advanced Methods Institute and the QualLab that talk about research practices and principles. They're all how-to chapters that show you. One is qual, quant, mixed methods. The other is all qualitative, that really shows you how to take up different approaches. Some are the same familiar approaches that you may know, and some are very new approaches that really pull together different qualitative methodologies and then show scholars how to do it. Paying attention to that liminality of the researcher and that self-work and community work that is constant in that work. So I'm going to ask you to engage in the chat if you're up for it. Decision points for research methodologies. What are your favorite methodological approaches? If you're up for it, please put it in the chat or write it in your own research memos on your own pages. But what are your methodological approaches? Are you about case study? Are you about phenomenology, grounded theory? Are you interested in there's reflexive thematic analysis that goes beyond basic thematic analysis, but it's actually a methodology that's pretty intentional and solid. So I'm interested to know if you all have particular methodological approaches. So if you write it here, oh, thanks, Jasmine, who does phenomenology. I love it. I have an example of phenomenology in a little bit, so that's wonderful. Think about your own approaches and what your decisions are, because I've seen so many scholars say to me, oh, I did these methods and I'm doing phenomenology, but then all their methods are from grounded theory. So there we're talking about incongruent research. If you say you're doing phenomenology like Dr. Thomas is doing, then Dr. Thomas is probably following phenomenology all the way through that approach, using methods for collection and analysis that follow that same methodology, and then potentially drawing from some others to help with that rigor if needed. There's also youth participatory and arts-based elicitation. I love it. Participant observation, interactional discourse analysis, community. Yeah, we can get that for you, Hillary. And I can make some of these slides available as well in terms of the definitions and all that. Happy to do that. So here's a few methodologies. I think we kind of, again, go to content analysis if that's how we're trained. And how do we really expand on what's out there and what's available to us, as well as paying attention to your field and what is considered rigorous in your field, but also how are you pushing on the edge of what is known and what your field really, really thinks about in terms of methodologies. Also, in terms of culturally responsive research, what are the approaches that really make sure to match your approach? Here, I want to also give a shout out to Dr. Stevie Johnson, who's in our School of Music, who is a higher ed faculty member. Faculty. He's had dissertation of the year in a higher ed association and connects higher ed, hip hop research, and community engaged research. He's a scholar here who's fairly new to the Ohio State community. It's been just a year and a half. So I hope you get a chance to know him and know his work. So think about your methodology, and then what about collection? So what are the tangible examples for collection that really pay attention to honoring the perspectives of communities? And so I want to give you that phenomenological example and the health sciences example, because I think sometimes we don't always think of engaged research from health sciences. And here, this is a project I've worked on with some ophthalmologists here at Ohio State, where phenomenology is really about the lived experiences of the participants and a phenomenon. And it was in this context, children who had concussions or didn't have concussions. And we did actually constant comparative analysis, which draws from grounded theory in order to take up the question of this patient outcomes reported measure. So the PROM, you go into the doctor's office, they have this patient reported outcome measure survey. How do you feel about this, right? Well, we use our eyes so much differently. Kids use their eyes so much differently these days than we did in the past. We need to update this PROM. So we took up a phenomenological approach, and in that field, it had to be positivist, post-positivist approach, which is very different than what I would take up in the field of education, maybe more of a constructive approach, a constructivist approach, or post-intentional approach. These are different paradigmatic approaches. Again, follow the one that fits your epistemological, ontological approach. And with phenomenology, it's about the whole parts, and really analyzing what's happening there. And instead of bracketing my perspective out as a researcher, because I actually believe that I can't do that, you're going to bridle or think about your own perspective and how bias or your perspective makes a difference in that research project throughout the process. We used NVivo, which is available at the libraries for you for free. I think there's another bunch of other qualitative software and quantitative software that's there. So I think Taiwo is really an excellent expert in this. But here's a little bit about what we did. We, of course, created that code book, and seeing that these were medical scholars interested in positivist research, intercodal reliability was key, as opposed to a consensus kind of project. We did then run a crosstab, which is really, again, drawing from grounded theory method to compare concussed and non-concussed children. And here were all the themes that really came out of this study. And for us, when I take a look at culturally responsive research, social impact, mobility, economic impact, the kid who was saying, I'm really upset because I have to take my mom out of her job every time I have to go to the doctor. And it was really painful for the kid. It was hard on the family. And so the child was feeling that burden, and that burden of from taking his mom from the job to come to visit the doctor every time. And I think that was key for the doctors to hear, key for us to try to figure out then, how do we make this work accessible and make sure that the economic impact is paying attention to as we put the research out there in clinics, as we make change in terms of the problem, but also how we do our daily work as clinicians or in whatever field or discipline that you're getting the work out to children and communities. So I'm going to give another example, and again, want to have you think about your own work in this approach. Here is a group of scholars that I worked with. They were advisees for a while now, Dr. Corey Still, and I still am in contact with all of them. Obviously, we're doing ongoing work, and they continue this great red dirt research. But as a group, we were looking at Indigenous case study, right? So here are these three Indigenous scholars, me, we're looking at issues of power and how I am on their chairing their dissertations, what that means in this approach. Do I participate in some areas of the research study and not in others? And really taking a look at case study as a methodology, because that's what the question was about. It was a case, the institutional case around Indigenous students and what was happening in terms of policy regarding this one institution. And here were the approaches of case study and the scholars that were available for us. Some of the very familiar case study scholars, Robert Yin, who I think is of his more a post-positivist kind of approach, Robert Stake, Sharon Merriam, and more of a constructivist approach, Leslie Bartlett and Fran Vavras have worked on global approach, really taking up more of a global approach to case study and what that means. I've worked with Leslie on more of a critical approach. More recently, that's in press right now. And so this group of Indigenous scholars are like, this isn't it. Like bracketing this particular set of this timeline and really taking a look at this, it's not resonating with me. It's not working for me. So I worked with this group for a long time on really thinking through how would we weave Indigenous case study, one that's paradigmatically congruent with the work you're doing, as well as methodologically sound and strong enough or rigorous enough for the work that they wanted to do for the question that they wanted to ask. And you can see more. I'll share the article with you if you're interested in what actually came out. But what we ended up doing was pulling from Margaret Kovach, who's a Canadian scholar in Indigenous auto-narrative, and then weaving together Sean Wilson's work on research as ceremony, and then drawing from comparative case study from Bartlett and Vavras. And we were able to kind of weave these together in a very intentional way, creating then this intentional Indigenous case study approach, and then following that. And we were able to publish actually a piece that talks about how you would do that and what we would do so that we could offer it, not just do the work and then move on and not share it with scholars, but also share the content as well. But we didn't stop there. This group is ongoing in terms of not just journal publications, book publications, but we're doing workshops on college campuses, talking with student affairs professionals. The three of them are all student affairs professionals. They work with graduate students all over the country, Indigenous graduate students. And when students come to campus and you cannot smudge in the rooms because it is a fire hazard, how to work with campuses to say that doesn't have to be a fire hazard. This is an important ceremonial approach that needs to happen in the residence halls. How can we work with campus communities to make sure that we're being culturally responsive in terms of the policies that we have and making that change, right? So again, you think about what are the methodologies that you need, and then also what are your favorite ways to collect this data? What approaches do you use? I think was already mentioned about arts-based elicitation. So thinking about, are you doing photo elicitation? Are you asking people for their testimonials, their stories, their life experiences? What are the approaches? What are you after? Of course, to answer that research question. And how can we go beyond doing no harm? Just, I think IRB has certain areas that they have to pay attention to. And if our IRB is willing to chat with you and talk with you about how to make sure that it falls within their parameters, but also you as a culturally responsive researcher, how do you go beyond do no harm? What are the things that your participants want to share with you, want to engage with you about? And I've had so many different approaches. People use tarot cards. Pick a tarot card here and then engage in a conversation. Drawing, here's this picture. Now I'd like you to draw your experience in this situation. There's certainly walking interviews. There's focus groups that are more sister circles. Maybe it's everybody creating a meal together. And so you have 8 recorders all around the room as this family comes together and talks about and makes a meal and really works together. And so through all those recorders, you're able to pick up all these different conversations happening. Is it about walking through walking through neighborhoods, right? Is it an embodied performance as somebody who's done performance ethnography? And I think of Keith Alexander out in California, who's one of the premier performance ethnographers. Tammy Spry, another scholar, does amazing work. Anna DeVere Smith, huge fan of hers. Photo elicitation, we've mentioned. Critical co-constructed autoethnographic journals. That's an approach that some of you with the activist academic could take a look at. Also, here's an article that talks about oversampling and the importance of oversampling if you're trying to answer a particular question. So not just in collection, but thinking about culturally responsive analysis methods. You don't want to abandon all of this when you get to your methods for analysis. You want to continue to use culturally responsive approaches. So here are a few examples, again, for your consideration. Pick what's useful to you, make it connect, walk your reader through what you're doing. But situational analysis is one that is used in arts, is used in the nursing quite a bit, is used across fields and disciplines. So I thought I'd bring that out. Adele Clark, it's a form of grounded theory, right? So you have Strauss and Corbin, here's grounded theory from a more positivist approach, post-positivist approach. Along comes Kathy Sharmaz, who's a constructivist. She studied with them, but she's like, no, I'm not a post-positivist, I'm a constructivist. So she offers constructivist grounded theory, Kathy Sharmaz. Well, then along comes Adele Clark, and I had the privilege of meeting them all at the International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry. So along comes Adele Clark. I was her grad and got to write on the wall as she was talking and on all the slides with the smelly markers, right? So here Adele Clark is saying, I'm a postmodern scholar. It's messy. Research is messy. So we want to name that. We want to honor that. We want to actually think through messy maps of all the data and then try to make order to it, try to make situational maps. There's all these series of maps that you can pick some that fit for you, but I think often they start with that messy map. She also really privileges social spheres and power arenas, taking a look at the political actors or the system of the medical system, how it operates, the funders, how that's happening, where that power is, and really asking and answering questions. Positional maps, right? Oh, I'm just a grad student, I don't know a lot. Yes, you do. You really do. You have a lot to offer and a lot of things that you're thinking about, and that original research is crucial. And so honoring all that and putting it through in very tangible methodological methodological approaches. Here are some scholars, if you want to take a look at people who have done this approach here in K-12 education. Michelle Salazar-Perez, I'm just a big fan of her work, and she has really taken situational analysis and used it in a critical way, looking at critical questions. Gail Canella, and then Lavanya Bennett, who works with trans people in vet hospital in Texas. So that's a part of her work as a counselor and a researcher there. So Lavanya is awesome. There's also another one that I want to quickly, I'm just going to kind of go through these and then we'll have time to talk, but intersectional methodology, which is written by Black women for Black women. And this is an approach that you could take up if you're interested. I mentioned earlier critical co-constructed autoethnography, which is really about the activist academic and how the scholars come together to put forward a new approach for scholars. Myra Ozias, who's over at Arizona, she actually pulls together critical discourse analysis, critical geography, taking a look at the text with the mapping and then putting these on top of each other. And so this is a part of some of the analysis that she really does. So now I'm going to ask a question for you all, and I know this is being taped, so I want to just you don't have to respond to this, but I do want us to think about this. In the current federal and state outstanding legislation that's not yet passed, does researcher positionality and reflexivity continue in terms of our research, in terms of our culturally responsive research? For me, I say yes, it has to. You have to pay attention to who you are as a researcher and to the participants, your co-conspirators, your co-constructors, your collaborators. You have to pay attention to the multiple identities and what's going on here. I know that can be dangerous, and I don't want to lessen that. I want to pull forward Kimberly Crenshaw's work on intersectionality, which is literally a road. She's described it. I got to see her in person, and she literally describes it as driving down this road, and it's the intersection of this road and this road that intersect together. It's not, oh, here's gender, here's class, here's race, here's sexual orientation, here's religion. It's not adding these on, it's not additive, it's at the intersection. Right? And with these, all identities matter. All identities are important. So paying attention to this is crucial. An Ohio State alum, actually, Rich Milner, has talked about the importance of positionality and cultural ways of knowing. Because if we don't pay attention to that, it can actually be dangerous to communities and individuals of color. And I would say dangerous to everyone if we don't pay attention to this. And so he actually teases out what are seen dangers. And I've worked with sociologists Mark Chesler and Al Young in terms of developing an interview protocol that talks through how teachers do great diverse, inclusive work. They've all been awarded this work. And then the last question, because they made sure interviewees and interviewers were of a different race or cultural background, they would say, would this whole interview have been different if we were of the same race and ethnicity, race and or ethnicity? And so many people were like, oh my gosh, yes, I would have had a whole different interview with you. I would have shared different things. And I have to think about, oh my gosh, it would have been totally different. And then other people were like, no, I would have shared this exact same stuff with you, right? So they put that seen danger in the interview protocol, and it was a part of the intentional research study. There's also unseen dangers, right? Where you can't see it, you're not sure. I worked with national policy conversations in higher ed, university presidents and policymakers, foundation officers, we're all in these rooms, graduate students, community partners, and shocker, community partners, women, people of color, graduate student voices were not included in final reports. So this was cutting out certain perspectives if they did not match that of the funders. So that would be an unseen danger. The organizers would have paid attention to that if they had been thinking about it. This was after the fact that I got to go in and take a look at this. And so then able to then make and adjust things in the future about how do you make change. I'm not saying everybody's perspective is right and going to be followed up on, but if we don't have everyone's perspectives when we're trying to solve these world problems, we're not going to be able to make that necessary change. There's going to be that nugget that we're going to miss. So how do we pay attention to multiple perspectives as we move forward? I see some questions in the Q&A. Ingrid, do you want to ask about that, about the liminality? Is that it? Yeah, liminality is like a liminal space, right? That undefined liminal, it's like living between in that fuzzy space. There are a number of scholars. One is a graduate of Ohio State, Lisa Combs Dela Cruz, who did a bunch of work on liminality. And I think there's more and more research on researchers and or participants living in liminal space. For Dr. De La Cruz, who's now a first year professor, she was interested in multiracial students and the liminality living between, well, wait, I'm not white, wait, I'm not black, wait, I'm not, whatever the multiracial identities of the student were. So they were living in this liminal space and to really analyze that liminal space. So thank you for that question. I'm so glad you asked that. It was nice to have an example right here from an alum. I'm trying to pull in the Ohio State great people. And I think that's one of those things, right? If it's seen, then how do you put that liminality question in to the research design? What's unforeseen? You'll never be able to see it, right? How to make sure that we're trying to see as much as we can as researchers throughout that research process. And I actually am someone who think about all your identities. What about language? What about nationality? All these identities are right, are who you are, right? I'm not about this is wrong, right? Coming up in intergroup dialogue, it's about having conversations about difference, dialogue, engaging with people and with each other. And if you, as a researcher, qualitative researcher as an instrument, if you're not good, if you're not rested, if you're not paying attention to who you are as a researcher, you're going to miss things in that research process. So I actually think paying attention to this without and spending that judgment, right? Not about judgment or this one's better than this or this is better than that. It's not about that. It's about really uncovering the identities of who you are, what you offer, who are your participants who are different than you. If I'm walking into a space and English is a second or third language for the participants, what does that mean for me? What does it mean for my research team? Do I need to cast a wider net in terms of bringing along Monica or Dahlia, who are advisees of mine, who are fluent in English and Spanish, right? How do you really think about your design in a way that really centers cultural responsibility, cultural responsiveness, and the work that you're doing? Their perspectives, Monica and Igdalia, are going to be so much more rich than me. I want people who are different than me on the team. I want to think with people who are different than me because it's going to make a difference in terms of where we go, what we see, what we do, and make a difference in terms of that circulation. I know some people use dissemination. Getting that work out there, I think, is crucial to culturally responsive research. Not just, I understand certainly publish or perish, and that is very real in an academic setting. And how do you put it in journals, but also potentially put it in practitioner magazines or newsletters where your participants are first authors? How do you make sure that there's performances that are out there? Anna DeVere Smith is somebody who does very detailed research and then puts together performances that actually move people about the healthcare system or about the Watts riots. All the things that people take a look at. Are you putting things on social media, community newsletters, blogs, different interventions? Are you changing your clinical practice, your wet and dry labs? How are you taking that concrete research and putting it into practice instead of letting it sit in the ivory tower? We want it to make a difference. Now that we have an updated prom, we want to get it out there and use it in the field with the working with Department of Defense now. What does it mean for military who are in the field who get concussions? And how can we make sure that that prom is up to date so that way there's better care in the field, and that makes a difference for security, for the world, for human beings, right? So making sure that this work is making a difference. So I want to say all your culturally responsive researcher decisions matter, whether I've covered them here or not. This is important work that you're all doing. And so I really want you to think about how do you live like this is your only life, right? This is just one life. And how do you research like this is your major contribution toward change? We need you to do this work. We need you to do culturally responsive work. We need you to reimagine the future. We really need it. Now is an important time. To help with you all, I'm going to give you these discount codes. They'll be on the slides, but I mentioned two of the books that are with the QualLab that we've done. Instead of us getting like a $40 honorarium, they shave that off and the discount goes to you. So you're welcome if you're interested in purchasing either of these books to actually go to Routledge website and plug in those. So with that, I want to say thank you so much. And I want to go turn to the questions that we have and have a conversation and unmute if we can, but we might not be able to. So I will turn it to Taiwo and Ingrid in terms of the conversations.
Thank you so much, Professor. I'm just wondering if, anyone has any questions going from here. You can unmute and ask. You can put it in the chat. Well, I have a quick one. Oh, sorry.
Yes, no, great. That's better than my question.
Yeah,
I've already talked.
I was just like wondering if you can help, shed more light when it comes to your methodological approach and why you should choose one over the other, or if you can choose any based on your current research.
That's a great question. That methodological approach and making that decision for me, I've gotten really good at one because that's what I came up as, right? So I did critical discourse analysis and different forms of discourse analysis with policy conversations and was trained up by somebody who that was her area, right? So she shared with me and she was in English ed, which was not my field. And then I worked with a policy researcher and he brought in the policy stuff, right? So I learned quite well how to work very thoroughly and the multiple approaches and multiple methods that you could use if you take that up and really dive in. But then over time, now instead, I've moved and I don't know why I got unmuted, but now I'm unmuted. I transitioned from studying higher ed for the public good. Are we doing the public any good? That was my dissertation. That was my research as an early career scholar, making sure we're making a difference. And it fits well with the talk here because now I've switched to actually studying research methodologies and methods. That's actually what I study, is finding that right match. It's really, for me, about congruence. If you have this question, the question should dictate the methodology, and that should dictate then your methods for collection and analysis. So phenomenology was mentioned earlier, and it's because it was about the lived experiences of the children in the space, what they were doing, how they were feeling about things, and really understanding their day-to-day lives, right? And so, but that was very different than the question that was about a university case with Indigenous students and policy and uproar and the president. And so case study really was the best fit there, but there wasn't quite a good fit. So we had to work on that weaving. And so for me, it's really about finding that question and ensuring that you're asking the question and following that congruent methodology. But methodology doesn't, it's not just one approach. So I mentioned case study and I had a bunch of scholars in an intentional order. Paradigmatic approaches, your epistemology, ontology, knowing, being, doing, all that is implicit in the work you do. It's a part of who you are as a researcher. And if you are a post-positivist, I think great, be a post-positivist and do it, and then follow congruently all you would pick up transcendental phenomenology. If you're a post-positivist, picking up phenomenology, transcendental phenomenology, that's your jam. If you are more of a constructivist, multiple different realities, right? I'm coming up with multiple truths, not just lowercase truth, capital T, you have capital T truth here, lowercase truth, we're finding, you know, truth. And then multiple truths is more of a constructivist, interpretivist approach. So that would be hermeneutic phenomenology. So instead of following the transcendental phenomenologists, you would actually want to follow the methodologists that are congruent for your approach and follow those multiple truths of phenomenology. Key and Mark Vogley, who has now come up with post-intentional phenomenology, which is one of the posts, and he has developed how you could go about this in a post kind of approach, right? This follows more culturally responsive work. It's not about the truth. It's about multiple truths, but also thinking through like that lived human being, all the things that he brings in, right? With kind of that way to go about it. Lisa's dissertation follows this approach, that one on liminality and multiracial students. So it's following my paradigmatic approach, not yours or anyone else's, right? I don't want to follow Ingrid's. I don't want to follow yours, Taiwo. I want to follow my own, or I want you to follow your own approach. Be who you are as a researcher and pick what is congruent for you, because that's going to be the most rigorous, the most solid. If I pretend to be a positivist or I pretend to be a post person, like I tend not to. I think of some of the postmodern work, Lady Gaga, right? Lady Gaga lives it, breathes it. You smell her outfits because it's all of meat, you know, like she can hang with the traditionalists, she can hang with Tony Bennett, but she can also be this activist, and you feel it, music, all the things, right? I think of the postmodern as like the Lady Gaga of qualitative research. And I love that. And that's not who I am. So I'm not necessarily going to follow a postmodern approach for my research, even though I can respect it, understand it. It's different than who I am. And I think it's so cool. And that's not me, right? But believe it, she knows her Tony Bennett. She knows her classical. She knows her salsa merengue. She knows she's an educated scholar. So if you are subvert the dominant paradigm, or you're different than the dominant paradigmatic approach in your field, you tend to know the dominant as well as your own non-dominant perspective, right? Even constructivism is sometimes under question in certain fields. So you have to know the dominant in your field, but then also know and take up the non-dominant approach that might fit for you. And so postmodern, you're postmodernist, pick post-intentional, work with Fogley and some of that work. So those are all phenomenology. Grounded theory does the same thing. I would follow Strauss and Corbin if I was looking for a capital T truth. I would follow Kathy Sharma's if it was multiple truths and her constructivist grounded theory. I would follow for critical or post-modern all the maps that we talked about. So research, there's so much here, right? You want to kind of follow it in terms of breadth and depth, meaning the breadth of approaches, finding your own, and then the depth of the rigor and the methods that you're picking up, so that way it's as rigorous or quality or strong or trustworthiness or valid for your own study. So it doesn't really answer, oh, I like this one best. I think it's the research question and then making sure it's congruent. Does that? I'm a dual research dork. I'll just chat with you about this all the time.
Thank you so much. And over to you, Ingrid. I think you're talking about them not being able to answer, actually on mute to ask their questions, so which is fine.
I'm looking at some of these questions. So some of the readings I've done on, here's the question from an anonymous attendee. Some of the reading I've done on Indigenous approaches to research, the authors advise not incorporating Indigenous approaches into Western models of research. After reading this, I felt very hesitant about incorporating Indigenous ways of knowing into my research. Based on your paper, could you speak about this briefly? I would say it's it's so hard, right, to tell somebody else what to do. I think a lot of research is about finding what's right for you. And I also think as a white scholar, I would never do Indigenous research methodologies and do an approach if I wasn't a part of the Red Dirt research team and the Indigenous scholars on the team really led in certain aspects, or I could help talk with them and then guide to, well, what's our question? Here's the question. Oh, that really fits case study. And then together we're researching. And then we also pulled in some of the ways where we did circles and really talk through our own experiences in terms of the things that were happening on campus and the case and all that. And I was, as a white person, sometimes a part of that. Sometimes I wasn't. And it was just the Indigenous people on the research team who were engaged in the conversations without me. And that's okay. That was a part of that process. And so I think it's kind of like that intersectional methodology. I'm not a Black woman. I would not take up intersectional methodology and would also support if Lori Patton Davis, who worked with a team on this research approach, was taking it up in an approach with a group of students. I think if an advisee, it depends on who's a part of the approach. Can I learn from an Indigenous methodological approach? Can I try to center it in a part of the work that I'm doing? Yes. Can I learn from Heather Schotten and some of the work she's done? Stephanie Waterman, who are two Indigenous scholars who have written about Indigenous research methodologies. I can learn from them. I can bring some of the knowledge in. I don't know that that would mean I am doing an Indigenous approach, right? I also hear in your question about bringing the approaches into Western models and what is sacred for Indigenous communities only and what white people should or shouldn't know, and paying attention to that as well. I just want to kind of name that as well. There's a last quick question, and I'm watching time too, because I feel like I could keep going about that, but I want to get to this other one about, could you talk about the conventional practice of focus groups and how this will evolve under the new framework in terms of thinking and inquiry? I love Jory Hall's work on culturally responsive focus groups. She's got a whole book on it, and it's really about not necessarily one-on-one interviews, but like this culturally responsive centeredness in focus groups. So I would encourage taking a look at Jory Hall, because I love that. And I've also done postmodern type versus more constructivist focus groups, and they feel different. They feel different based on how you're designing them. So again, paying attention this way, and then reading deeply and taking a look at Jory Hall, Dr. Hall's work on that, I think would be great.
Thank you so much. No more questions. I
I see
think,
we're at time, so I
yeah,
didn't want
we're
to.
right on time. So thank you so much for everyone for joining. So over to you, Ingrid.
So thank you all for attending. Again, we will sending a follow-up email with the recording and any resources. So thank you all for attending and have a great day.